Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. As David said, I'm Sarah Cannon. I'm a postdoc at the Center for Indigenous Fisheries, which is located within the Institute for Oceans and Fisheries at UBC. And I'm delighted to be here today to introduce today's speaker, Kevin Chang. So Kevin is the executive director of Kua'Āina Ulu Auamo, which means Grassroots Growing Through Shared Kuleana or Responsibility. The acronym KUA, K-U-A, means back. Like a backbone, KUA is a convening and advocacy organization for movement networks for rural and Native Hawaiian community-driven biocultural resource management initiatives. Kevin and his team are building a backbone organization that supports community-based solutions to problems stemming from environmental degradation in Hawaii. KUA works with its network and community members, government agencies, and civil society towards restoring the traditional role of Hawaii communities as caretakers of their lands and waters. So with that, please join me in welcoming Kevin Chang.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Chang, coming to you from the Kingdom of Hawaii, I suppose. I'm on the island of Oahu in an area called Kahalu'u, a community I grew up in, which was rural, but I would call semi-rural today. I live on the windward side of the island of Oahu in the state of Hawaii. Um, Our state is made up of 8 main islands. However, it's inclusive of thousands of small uninhabited islands. Most of our people are concentrated in 6 of those 8 islands. My island, Oahu, being probably the most populated and the capital island. My background actually is in law, although haven't really practiced law for quite a time. And I guess surprisingly ended up in conservation. I didn't understand what conservation was. When I was little, I always understood that, always felt that environment was integral to our community. We were part of the environment. And I think over time, just because of the community I grew up in, I ended up doing this kind of work. So to explain my work to you, I've put up a 5-year-old PowerPoint just to keep me kind of on track, and share a little bit of my work with you, and then hopefully we can go into a more Q&A session where I can get extremely tangential. So this first screen, just you see on the bottom the name of my organization, Kua'Āina Ulu Auamo. Kua'Āina meaning people who are the backbone of the community, the farmers, the people who work the land. The term once was had a negative connotation, like country bumpkin. Today, it's more something people proudly use. The word ulu, ulu is a breadfruit, but it also means to grow. And the last word, awamo, is the palanquin or the carrying stick held by more than one person to carry a burden that cannot be carried alone. And so collectively, we say our name means grassroots growing through shared kuleana or responsibility. Kuleana is a Hawaiian word that basically combines rights and responsibilities as intertwined and not separate. I think I said I'm from the community I'm coming to you from, Kahalu. I've lived here 50 years out of maybe 50, and I think I'm 52 now. I am not Native Hawaiian. I am, I did the DNA study. I don't know what I am anymore, but mostly Chinese, and ironically thought I was Irish, but like maybe not. So anyway, we're always growing. So let's move on. So at the core of Kua'aina's work is really a vision of what we call Aina Momona, which is a term from Hawaii's history that has referred to the fat lands, literally the fat lands. Aina often has been used to mean land these days, but it's broader than that. It means that which feeds, which includes from the Mauka, the mountain, to Makai, the ocean. And momona means basically abundant or fat. So the fat, abundant lands is the vision that our communities see. And we believe empowered community stewardship efforts lead to Aina Momona. And we believe the way we can help our communities achieve Aina Momona is to help them create a context for which they are increasingly self-strengthening, self-determining, and becoming key decision makers in the trajectory of their community. In other words, self-determination in many ways. Also, that not only are they engaged in governance, but they're actively involved in the actual management or the maintenance and care of their places. That they're able to take these two aspects of kind of what we call malama aina, to care for that which feeds, and make them sustainable in the long run, because many of them do this work through the establishment of nonprofit organizations. And lastly, to be able to adapt. I think we're all familiar with the changing climate and changing conditions for communities everywhere. And we have to learn to understand those, adapt to them, mitigate them, and do all that we can to perpetuate and continue who our community is. We look at our vision through a theory of change. This is our theory of change. I can email this to you guys later if anybody's really interested. But those kind of four kind of goals I mentioned: decision making, managing, sustainability, adaptability. We work on developing those through facilitating community networks. We have 3 networks, which I'll talk about eventually. But what we do is we gather those networks annually in large groups. And in between those large gatherings, we present smaller exchanges, uh, help communities strategize and discuss things like governance and management with each other, to build kind of a spirit of unity when they can agree on common issues. We help them advocate when they want it. In some cases, we fiscally sponsor organizations. Have in time helped them do strategic planning and other things like that. But in addition to that, as an organization, we connect to the partners that we need to change in the ecosystem to make conditions better for community management, like our government, like the larger NGOs and other partners. In fact, we were created to address that because if you don't know the history of Hawaii, Hawaii was overthrown by the United States in 1893. And when Hawaii was annexed to the United States, a kind of overlay of law was placed over how things were traditionally done in Hawaii. And that changed the relationship of people to their place. And so we're having to find new ways to rebuild and bring those traditions back. This is just probably the oldest picture we could find in our history, and you can tell by the graininess of the photo that it's pretty old, relatively, I guess, old. This is a picture of the leaders from around a dozen communities across our state who met in 2003. These leaders are primarily from fishing communities, and they were supporting an effort that started in 1994, which created a law in our state called the Community-Based Subsistence Fishing Area Law. It's the only law on our books that says a community can co-manage a fishery and can create laws, rules, and regulations based on the traditional and customary practices of the native Hawaiian community of that place. So most of the people in these pictures, beyond kind of graduate students and interns, are elders from fishing communities on the island of Molokai, on Oahu, on Maui, and on Kauai. And these folks created in 2003 what they called the Hawaii Community Stewardship Network. This eventually evolved into what became called the Ealupu network. Ealupu means to move forward together. And this group really was held together by a few people who put in the work to keep them united and working. And at a certain time, it was decided they needed to create an organization that would work full time to keep them connected and working together. And that's how the organization I work for, Kua, was created. So we were created initially to keep Ealupu going and to help them grow and empower each other. Today, we've been in existence now, I've been told, maybe 14 years. Um, I gotta check my own memory. But today we facilitate three networks. Ealupu, which is what I call a Kua'ኢና network, community Kua'ኢና network, a network of community-based environmental stewardship groups, working in the mountains, working in the forests, working on the shoreline. But the tendency of our work tends towards the fisheries because at this time the most strategic kind of foot in the door is where communities can create their own rules based on their traditions. Our other network is the Hui Malama, which is the group that cares for the fish ponds. Hawaii has had a long history of mariculture, growing fish mostly on our shorelines through fish ponds called a Kua'Pā style of fish pond, but there are many other styles, and this group exists to perpetuate and restore those ponds, also with a vision of Aina Momona. And then our third network is the Limu Hui. Limu means seaweed, Hui means group. It is a group of mostly elders who gather annually to talk about, share, and perpetuate traditions around the use of seaweed in Hawaii. So you can see Ealupu has grown from a dozen communities to about 40 communities. In fact, today I think they now are over 40. They're the most sophisticated network in the sense that they have built up a more formal approach to their governance. They have a council that they elect annually. They have an ailike or a creed that someone signs when they join the network. And so they're ever evolving. And because of them, I feel our state is beginning to change the way it thinks about managing natural resources. Hui Malama you can see in this photo, there's a line of folks handing stones across the wall to an area where they're rebuilding the wall. And this is a common activity our folks are involved in. They comprise of about almost 40 organizations and 60 fish ponds from across our state. And I can answer more questions about the state of fish ponds after. Limuhui, like I mentioned, is our seaweed folks. They're a smaller group because they focus on individuals, often elders. And they are the youngest in turn, and that they have been meeting for 10 years, primarily through Kua. Kua helped establish the Limuhui. The other networks pre-existed Kua and have been around for over 2 decades. So today, like I said, we've gone from 12 to almost 70 regions across the state of Hawaii. And I think, you can all see when people can find ways to unite and find common ground, there's a lot we can do together. This is a random slide, but I guess I'll explain a little bit about it. I got this from a guy named Stuart Brand, and he called it pace layering. And he talked about that there are different layers of kind of change and pace in society. And the fact that the layer of commerce and fashion moves so quickly that it can do little to stop its pace or plan for the future. And so those layers cannot overcome the bottom layers, which keep those in check and kind of create a certain inertia And the layer that most people are involved in is governance and culture. And that's where I think our folks can, I think, as Bob Marley used to talk about, slowing the train down. And that's what we're doing here in Hawaii. Took this from, I'm sure you guys may have heard of collective impact theory. Um, we don't necessarily ascribe to it, but it does help us think about our work. The way we do work is we work on the top and the bottom and the middle of this kind of six conditions of change. Um, we work to help communities change policies, change practices, and change the way resource flows within government to community, with philanthropists, between philanthropists and community, and between communities themselves. And we build relationships between communities and those they need to change their circumstances. And when they do that, just by being at the table, they begin to change the power dynamics. And then these are all founded on mental models or ways of thinking, value systems, and practices. And so this sort of embodies what I think of when we look at the mental model portion of this triangle of systems change. Um, this is from a book written by one of our elders who passed recently, but it's what I call the Konohiki mindset. So when we talk about a mental model, I often say we're trying to develop a Konohiki mindset. And our elder who wrote this is from a book he wrote. His name is Carlos Andrade, but this is his quote. In traditional society, konohiki is a term we use in Hawaii often to mean land manager. But before the overthrow, the word was understood to be more broad than just like a land manager managing the business of a land. Anyway, in traditional society, konohiki were bridges connecting the governing and the governed. Konohiki had to gather in the fruits of the ahupua'a, or the watershed region, for ali'i, the chiefs, the mo'i, kind of the governor, the king, and the kua, the gods. However, they needed to ensure that the producers of these fruits, the maka'aina, the common people, or in our case, the Kua'Āina, were well cared for and fairly treated. If not, according to traditional custom and practice, maka'aina were free to move and invest their time and energy in the more deserving konohiki, an option easily made possible by the extensive kinship networks enjoyed by most folks outside of their region or watershed. But konohiki also had to have respect from the people and enough charisma to draw in and make maka'aina feel confidence about investing their lives and energy in the long-term success of the ahupua'a. This is a mindset that I think we try to model, but also advocate for in the hallways of governance here on Oahu, being that most of our resources are still centrally governed from the island of Oahu. And this is just a photo. Oops, how did that disappear? This is a photo of one of our gatherings. I think if you look down there in the middle, you'll see a bald man with a blue aloha shirt. He's gathering with our communities on the island of Oahu in a place called Waimanalo, and his name is Fikret Berkes. And Uncle Fikret spent about a week with us, building rock wall, planting limu, seaweed, and getting to know how our communities work. So that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully that kind of gave you an overview of what we do. Hopefully that made sense for you. And if it didn't, now you can ask questions.
Okay. Thanks very much, Kevin. So we're going to open it up now to questions from the audience. Yeah, so you can either type it into the chat And if you want me to read it out, or you can raise your hand on the Zoom and I'll call on you and you should be able to unmute yourself and speak. While we're waiting for people to contribute, I had a question about, you mentioned that there is an allowance within, I guess, the Hawaiian state law for traditional fisheries practices with the community. Does that ever, just looking at sort of some of the issues that have surrounded those types of practices in Canada, is there another layer of complication with federal regulation, or is that sort of a side issue?
I guess it depends what you mean, but no, federal law does not have much to do with the community fishery rules. They might affect our fish pond guys because of things like the Army Corps of Engineering and their governance over navigable waters. But for community fishery management, no, not really.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Andrea, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I did. Hi, Kevin. Nice to see you.
Hi, Andrea.
I just wanted to welcome people also to turn on their cameras since we've got this time to be in conversation with one another. It's nice if we can interact in that way. So if you're in a position to, feel free to turn your camera on. It's all enabled. Thank you, Catherine. I really appreciated what you brought forward, and this really connects to lots of conversations that we're having within the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries these days. Our next faculty member to join us is Sky Augustine, who's involved in the Indigenous Aquaculture Collective and in sea gardening on this coast. And so these topics have been high on all of our minds as of late. My question for you is in relation to the vision of, and I apologize if I get the name wrong, but of Aina Mamona, of abundant resources. I was just thinking back, like at World Fisheries Congress, we talked a bit about, so many managers are preoccupied with managing death rather than honoring life. And I just wanted to understand more about like the principle of like managing for abundance in this context, if you can speak to that a little bit further. Does that resonate?
I think so. Can you say that again?
I'm just wondering, like the vision for Aina Mamona, if I'm saying that properly, is that really about cultivating abundance? And how does that principle differ from, the imposed forms of management that colonizers brought to Hawaii?
Yeah, I think it's different. The term Aina Momona was taken from a book of an old Native Hawaiian historian, who talked about how a landscape was abundant, especially if it had a fish pond connected to it. And today when we talk about fish ponds, we often talk about how a fish pond's health is really determined by the health of its surrounding environment. So a lot of our fish ponds today are having a hard time being restored because of what we do on the land. So I think Aina Momona itself is a more holistic view on what environmental health is. And when we talk about a Konohiki mindset, what we're really talking about is more place-based natural resource management. So when the nation of Hawaii was overthrown by the United States, I kind of mentioned that a new layer of resource management kind of policy was placed over that, which basically kind of made most decisions around natural resources centralized. And And at that time, so if we're talking about colonization, ultimately the centralized decision making was really about allowing others to um, exploit or take the resources of the places rather than focusing on the maintenance and long-term care of them. Um, and so we're trying to shift the way our government works from being, there are situations where I think we have no choice but to have like a central decision-making mechanism on some things. But on a lot of things, I think it's the people and the place that should decide its kind of trajectory. And so we work to, push our government to be more uh, decentralized, right? So the community-based subsistence fishing law that I talked about really has been catalytic because we can build things around it, Once a community gets its rules and designation, if they haven't figured it out before, which they have, they found out that the government really has very little capacity to be a good partner. Um, they rarely can enforce the laws. Um, they're on Oahu, they're not there necessarily, or if they're on island, there aren't enough of them on island. And so what happens is the communities get involved in pushing, not just building their capacity, but building the capacity and changing the mindset of the government. So things they have contributed to is in the last 14 years, they've supported the development of a enforcement academy, which changed the whole way environment enforcement is done. Because at one time Hawaii could only hire kind of police retirees who couldn't tell one fish from the other. Um, And today now they're hiring people who are hunters, fishers, people who care about the places. They want to work on those islands. They want to be part of the solution. And then today, when they call the academy together, their registrations are overwhelmed. They're getting more people than they can handle. But that's beginning to have an impact on how our state manages resources. We also supported the development of an environmental court. Just like our enforcement officers, our judge cannot tell one fish from another. And if they can't tell one fish from another, they're gonna work on the cases where they can identify what's going on, like murder and whatnot. Not to say that a fish violation is more above resolving a murder issue, but pushing the state to have what we call an environmental court system allows judges to take the time to focus on resources and to learn about them. And the more enforcement officers we have, the more of these cases that communities bring forward for enforcement can be heard by a competent judge. But also within Division of Aquatic Resources which implements the fishery areas, we've pushed for hiring of coordinators and employees who are from our communities, but also are more out-facing. Their job is to build relationships. Their job is to listen more and to understand what communities are wanting, and to be able to differentiate between um, communities of a place and communities who just come to your place to take what you have. And so all that kind of is all this kind of social cultural infrastructure that we have to help build around this whole effort that communities want to see. That makes any sense?
Yep. There's a question in the chat, or I guess comment, asking if you can elaborate a little bit on the goals of the seaweed group.
Yeah. Hi, Auntie Barbara. Our seaweed folks, I think their core focus is to really revive cultural awareness, understanding and care for native seaweed, native limu. Like the fish ponds, seaweed really is dependent on what we do on land. Our native seaweed really can't be birthed if there's no fresh water going into our oceans, because it's where the fresh and where the brackish water comes up is made, is often where our seaweed is born, or the life is born. And the way we've developed our islands has really closed off a lot of those kind of pathways to the shoreline that fresh water once had. Yeah. So just by loving seaweed, they begin to kind of love and understand the larger systems that allow the seaweed to be propagated. So first it's the cultural understanding, the learning and the awareness, and to get our larger community to care. So they've helped designate I think 2022 was the year of the limu, and so there's a lot our community did around learning about seaweed. But they also, working with us, get involved in certain advocacy. So I think last year we named the state seaweed, which is called limu kala. They chose limu kala because limu kala, basically, kala means to break or to forgive. And it is used in ceremonies of kind of mediation and relationship mending, often called ho'oponopono. But they've passed policy around limu kala with a broader kind of community healing, I think, aspect to it. They've gone and learned from some of these larger corporate seaweed efforts, because they need to understand what's happening in the world to seaweed. So they go on informational and educational exchanges. And some communities are actually learning how to grow their own seaweed, and trying to figure out how they can then, propagate it in the ocean. So in the cases, they're doing them in tanks, but eventually what they want to do is outplant it in the ocean. And they're having to learn what that is and how to do it. And that's the only way we're going to learn is if we do it. So.
Okay, thanks. Barb has posted a question. I guess you want me to read it out, Barb. I don't mind doing that. Does the involvement of the youth make a difference in their life choices and healing?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's what we want to see, right? We want to see young people taking on leadership. Some of our elders want that, and then once they get it, they're like, eh. but I'm definitely seeing that. I mean, I'm becoming an elder, and I'm noticing it. Do I like it? Yeah, I like most of it. But we do have young people who are wanting to take what they're learning and make it more broadly real, like in our government, in our policy. They're taking an interest in policy. They're taking an interest in how do they make it the way they sustain themselves here and stay here. How do we advocate and help them advocate so that more jobs around caring for Hawaii exist and that those jobs help them stay here? And these are issues that are hard questions, and actually I think often are harder for our elders to deal with because it's not something they've necessarily thought about. They've thought about it mostly as carrying on the practice, but how do you carry on the practice in a way that allows you to build a workforce that's kind of like rebuilding Hawaii? It's an interesting tension I'm seeing that will grow in time between our elders and our youth in some ways. But definitely our young people are beginning to take up the Auamo.
Okay. Diane New posted a question, says, I am impressed, though not surprised, that the people developed a subsistence fisheries law and activism around that in advance of the United Nations Declaration on the Human Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But that declaration was years in the making. Was the UN declaration ever, quote, useful to the social awareness process you have described, perhaps to its reception?
I would say indirectly, and maybe, but more so with time. I think my organization is much more involved internationally than most are. I think if you live in the United States, you don't even know what the United Nations is or what it does and what do these declarations mean at all. But in interfacing with the broader community, like interfacing with you guys, we learn more about these things. But I wouldn't say like UN drip is like commonly cited by our communities when they do this. If anything, they will cite what's called the apology law, passed resolution passed in 1993 to commemorate the overthrow, where the United States apologized. They'll cite that, and then if they're aware of UNDRIP, then they'll cite it. But it's not really a common thing. Maybe it's more common among academics, but not regular folks. Not so much.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? No. In that case, I'd like you all to join me in thanking Kevin for a very thought-provoking presentation. And we wish him all the best in his work. I'd also just like to mention, while I have you all, that there is no seminar next week due to the reading week at the university. But the week after is going to be an online seminar again with Maria Pena coming to us from the University of West Indies. And so we hope to see you all there again. Again, let's have a big round of applause, electronic applause for Kevin and for giving us this information and his time, both of which were valuable. Thank you, Kevin.
Wish that all your Valentine's dreams come true.
Thank you, Kevin.
David, there is one question.
Oh, yeah, sorry. There is one question that, sorry, came in, and we have the time. Is KUA expanding to the other islands or currently only in Oahu?
Well, KUA's work is statewide, but yeah, our office is on Oahu. The majority of our staff is on Oahu, but our networks are across the state. What is happening, I mean, it kind of comes and goes and fits in spurts because it's an issue of really about resource and capacity. And one time early in our history, communities really wanted to see island councils be developed. And I think the thing that people always kind of overlooked was the need for resources to do that. You don't feel like you need somebody to keep people together. And that's probably why in a lot of cases, women in culture are overlooked because they're kind of the culture keepers and they're the ones who keep the community together. That's actually a service. And when you're creating like a network of people, to really make it effective, someone's got to kind of keep the fire going, yeah. So off and on, there's this an idea to have island-based networks. Our capacity has grown over time, and we're slowly helping to explore that. But it's always been great when the communities themselves decide they want that and work towards it. And in some cases, they've been able to continue having some of that. So like on Hawaii Island, there are two smaller community networks. They're all made up of members of our statewide network. There's been a long-going network called Maui Nui, which is comprised of all the islands in Maui County, Maui, Lanai, Molokai. They meet annually. They're also members of our statewide network. But I think if we're able to keep going, those things will evolve naturally. I think in the past they've been hard because people just wanted them, but you can't force it. People gotta, you know, people gotta want it and invest in it and see it become real over time.